This last panel for today deals with application space, and we're fortunate to have Michael Jones with us. He is Google's chief technology advocate, but also the either current or former CTO of Google Earth. And so those of you who've enjoyed Google Earth applications owe Michael a good deal. So Michael's agreed to chair the applications panel, and I'll turn it over to him and have at it.
Okay, great. So here we are. And we're right there, just underneath the shadow is where we are. And Vin asked us to talk a little bit about applications. I know, you've had a lot of fun talking about dots and commas and slashes and things, but I was thinking while you were talking, you could just use dashes and dots and do it in Morse code. But we have 3 or 4 of us actually. So Chamath is going to tell us about Facebook, why it works, how that's going to change in the future, and how the internet needs to change to make the next version of that possible, or some version of that, something orthogonal, something sort of in that spirit. Mike's going to talk about how to make the internet and the applications it bears be a spoken word place, a conversation, a physical conversation between computers and people. You see that coming out a little bit in Google search for mobile searching, and Google 411. So that the logic is a lot of places where a keyboard is ridiculous, but you might be able to say it even if you couldn't key it in some complex kanji way. So that's an interesting concept. Chad's going to talk about YouTube, and then I'll talk a little bit about, just real quick, I'm the moderator, so I don't get much time. I can talk a little bit about maps and Earth. So I was going to do a little introduction for these guys here. So starting with Chamath, who's the vice president of everything important, like user growth, mobile, and international expansion. So imagine if he wasn't at Facebook. They would be shrinking in users. It would not be on mobile devices, and they would have no international business operations. The thing I like best about that was he was at Winamp. That's awesome. It's awesome. So he's right there. And I'd imagine just sitting here, but nonetheless, there we are. Mike is with me at Google here, among a lot of us are. And his big area is making computers talk, which seems reasonable since we talk. It's a lower bandwidth than what we see, but it's nice in that it's something you can do while you do something else, which has remarkable and beneficial applications. I worked a long time ago in flight simulation and military fighter planes, and one of the biggest things was using speech to guide pilots because they could do something while they were being talked to. If you look at a display, the guy's going to shoot you while you're looking at the screen, but it's the same thing as don't use a cell phone in the car. But if voices come over your ears, you're good shape. So you use different voices, male, female, different languages, different accents, in different spatial positionings, 360, and you could get all the target craft that were coming toward you radially positioned, calling out their distances and threat level. And people can handle 15, 20 people in the air around them perfectly. So I'm a big fan of speech, even in less thrilling context. And then Chad, of course, is famous for doing YouTube. And the thing fun about Chad is that
today we have some exciting news for you.
We've building a web
been acquired by Google.
29-year-old Chad Hurley and his business partner Steve Chen are mega rich. They founded YouTube a mere 20 months ago, and now the global video sharing website is being bought out by Google for $1.6 billion in Google stocks.
It doesn't even feel real. Like it's unbelievable,
surreal,
it's bizarre.
Heather Hurley is Chad's proud older sister. She and her mother both teach in the Twin Valley School District. Chad graduated from the high school here back in '95. It's where he fell in love with computers and graphic design.
That's really quite fascinating. So that's what you get for making it user-contributed content. For me, my thing was I'm the guy that figured out how to sell ice to Eskimos. So this is using Google Maps to find the ice store in Fairbanks, Alaska. And you can get the #1 rated ice place. This is going to the Champs-Élysées and looking at some of the sidewalk cafe environment there. Maybe it's better in person, but if you can't go, maybe you could go on the computer. You can drive around and look and zoom in. You'll notice that the license plates are all recognized, image processing, and blurred out automatically to meet European Union laws. Yeah, and if you see sides of billboards, the people are blurred out on the billboards. It's pretty funny. They also take people to the Mars, let them drive down in valleys and canyons. So my thing is about information and context. Between the four of us are going to talk, we have more than 1 billion unique users every month use our products. And so they don't represent all of the internet or the most important things, maybe, but they certainly are a meaningful element of what you guys are trying to build infrastructure for. And we thought if we all chatted a little bit, maybe we could give you a sense of things that maybe hold us back, things that we'd love to see change, and maybe dreams we have that we need help to fulfill just from an infrastructure standpoint. So if you guys will join me, we're good. Okay, so but that is a little personal intro to the people. I love that video, of your mom and your sister talking about it. It's the best introduction ever. Yeah, so I'm just going to hand the phone to Chamath, and what I'd asked you guys to talk to you basically was just what I said, not in a formulaic way, but just basically things like what constraints stopped you from building what you wanted to build, even though what you built was maybe brilliantly successful, but maybe it's not the same brilliant successful you want to build. What constraints would you love to see lifted that would really change things in a dramatic way? Just things like that. So there you go.
It's a tough question to start to answer, but I'll take an attempt at it. So over the last couple of years, I think many of the constraints that we've had have really been more of a function of time. So when you think about sort of internet behaviors and what's possible, companies like ours will sort of innovate and move the ball forward and set a new standard in sort of what expectations should be. But at the same time, you do that with the notion of what the ultimate finish line looks like. And how fast you get there is really based on a combination of your ability to innovate plus the ability for the market to move generally in the direction that you want it to go to. So I remember sort of 2 years ago, has it been 2 years? Yeah, it's 2 years ago, when we were about to launch platforms, sort of I was the first executive in sort of to help usher in Facebook platform. And, it was, we thought to ourselves, how cool would it be to build an ecosystem within the four walls of Facebook? But when we started talking about it, we actually started talking about it from the guise of how cool would it be to actually have this really amazing social context all over the web. But the reality was that at that time, it made the most sense to start sort of where we were and then iterate, make that fairly successful, then focus on growth, sort of expand the reach of the product, eliminate as many barriers as possible, expand internationally, get to scale, and then allow sort of the entire ecosystem to exist, not just within the four walls of Facebook, but frankly, on any device within the internet or connected to the internet. So in many ways, what we realized through sort of that's with Facebook Connect, by the way. But what we realized, I think, through that process is that oftentimes many companies, I think, have a really great vision for what's possible. And a lot of the time, the constraint that is there is actually not something that you can necessarily eliminate just with technology. You need to move standards. You need to move expectations. You need to sort of move entire incentives and consumer dynamics to a place that allows certain things to happen. And I think that entire exercise of first working on Facebook platform, then working on Connect, kind of really brought that home for me personally. So, I think our ambitions are frankly, fairly expansive. I think we can provide a lot of value in the world. I think that we can build a really compelling service that allows the entire world to connect and share. That will hopefully usher in a lot of transparency, all of those good things. And we're going to, try to scale our company as fast as possible to sort of meet those objectives. But in many ways, what I really see is that we also need to move consumer expectation and sentiment along the way. Because in the absence of that, I think many of the really potentially disruptive things that are possible won't really happen. And so that's actually the toughest challenge that we have, is really trying to identify what those expectations are and then trying to figure out really novel, useful ways of showing people what the value is of, more openness and more sharing and more content production and all of these things that may seem tactical at the time but ladder up into something that's very useful and necessary for us to achieve what our long-term vision is. Oh, questions. Jesus. Okay. Should I pass the mic down maybe and then we can come back? Or okay.
You can answer yes or no. Does Facebook bump into the Great Firewall of China?
Sorry, say that again?
Is Facebook affected at all by the Great Firewall of China?
I think it's yes and no.
I was just asking if Facebook runs into problems with the Great Firewall of China.
We haven't had any explicit problems right now, but I think we go through the same problems and we go through the same issues as every other company with respect to China.
So since you gave a rather positive view and didn't identify a technological hurdle, let me see if I can add another aspect to the original question, which maybe can just be passed down to those as well. Is there a technology that you thought you needed, or a feature you thought you needed, that you discovered that you did not need, that there was a perceived impediment that in fact, when you really got down to brass tacks, you said, oh, really, gee, that doesn't matter after all. Just on the flip side.
Yeah, I think that's like the natural sort of like ebb and flow of how we build stuff. So, I'll give you an example of sort of our last iteration, which was to move to an entirely deterministic sort of real-time presentation of information. In doing so, what we did was we shifted sort of the focus away from sort of an algorithmic curating of content to an area. I think what we realized through that specifically is that you need to make sure that you balance both of those aspects. That there are some people at the bleeding edge, for example, who use the product so often that the only way to actually meet their needs is to have a fully deterministic real-time environment that's just massively shoving data down the pipe to that person. At the same time, there's an entire body of people that we've acquired over the last year and a half, who are, what you would typically call like sort of middle America, just not in a pejorative sense, but just in a general sort of categorization sense, who, have other things that they do. And, they maybe still only log in once or twice a day. And so that algorithmic presentation is just as critical. And so, I think like the challenges that we have are really, as you said, are very accurate, which is to figure out which things matter in what context and how do you make sure you actually present those at the right time. And that is something that, we don't generally just kind of like stick our thumb in the air and just try to intuit. We do a fair amount of A/B testing, which is, I think it's, a lot of rigor that I think you guys have adopted quite successfully. We test things, and when they work, we kind of like, roll them out to a broad set of users, and when they don't work, we kind of sunset them and move on. But if you've looked at the evolution of the site, I think you see many features that have started initially have been somewhat marginalized, and I think that's because we've figured out that other things are more important, or the things that we had at the time weren't as important. I'm not sure if that answers it, but that's about as precise as I can tell you.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Talk about our story, where we're coming from, and talk about some of the constraints that we saw at the time and we still sometimes see today. Really, when we started YouTube, we were looking at our own personal problems. That's in a nutshell how I explain kind of what we were able to create, is that we were frustrated with online video. It wasn't easy to send, it wasn't even easy to receive, it wasn't easy to view this content in multiple formats, multiple players. And we just tried to simplify that. We weren't necessarily thinking about the constraints of bandwidth, the limitations on storage, or how we're going to serve this video, but it was more or less how could we easily get video to an end user in a simplified way. So we were taking these videos, multiple video formats with multiple audio components, and re-encoding these videos into Flash video, and that solved the basic problem of providing a seamless way to play back this video content through one experience through Flash, and that people didn't have to think about the type of media player or the type of video file that they were dealing with. And obviously, we tried to reduce the file size, and again, that we weren't necessarily thinking about costs or how we efficiently push this through a certain set of bandwidth that was available to us, but just simply how could we provide an experience to the end user that wouldn't need the buffer very much, would be pretty seamless and fast. So we'd reduce the file size so that we could accomplish that. And I think from our experience, we were coming from PayPal. We were coming as myself as a designer, Steve as an engineer, from kind of the early days of PayPal, and us trying to figure out a way that people could easily deal with payments, and simplifying that process and really giving them a solution that they can take with them in form of payment buttons that they can put on auction listings. And we sort of looked at the video space in the same way as how could we provide a video solution for them that not only simplified the problem or created a solution, but something that they could take with them. So video embeds was that for us. That was our payment buttons. It allowed people to take any video, even if they didn't upload the video, to their own website or blog, and gave them a video solution. And then that embed primarily served as a marketing tool. All that extra bandwidth we were serving for videos on other sites would drive people back to our site with functionality, and basically the entire video itself was a link to YouTube, and it was also associated with our brand, the YouTube logo. So it's kind of those little subtle things that we tried to implement, but again, with our backgrounds coming from kind of the payment scene and not necessarily knowing anything about video, I guess we didn't know the rules, which is a good thing when you're trying to get into this world of video, not only in terms of its technical challenges, but challenges that we didn't necessarily foresee in the copyright space. Is that it's maybe the bigger challenges that have faced us today are within that world. I think technically we have a good hold on storing and serving bandwidth. Definitely we'd love the end consumer to continue to have more bandwidth, to access more videos, and ultimately for that bandwidth to be cheaper for us. But the world of rights is somewhat complex, and we're trying to create new solutions for companies around the world where they can not only identify this content in a more automated way and remove it from our site, but provide maximum choice for them to leverage what their biggest fans in the community is doing with their content. And they can either leverage that for marketing reasons, learn how people are consuming their content, and incorporating that into future development of content, or leveraging maybe how a music band is scheduling a tour, or leveraging it for monetizable reasons. They can identify this content, place ads against it, and earn an additional revenue source. So for us, I guess being kind of naive on all fronts with video, it gave us an edge of how we were just approaching it from, I guess, the user's perspective, and what we would want, they would want as well. And we're able to get a few things right, and at the end of the day, be at the right place at the right time, where people had the devices and the connections to participate in this new world.
Denise. Just a couple questions, and then we'll do some more questions.
Okay, this is for Chad. Could you say a little bit about the role of standards in what you have accomplished so far, and has it been significant for proprietary things like well, I guess Flash isn't really an official standard.
No. Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Okay, how's that? All right. So I was asking about standards and the role they play, if any, in the current YouTube universe.
Yep. Flash has just provided a seamless way for us to serve video, and it's a pretty lightweight way for people to consume that video. And it's on about 98% of the browsers out there. So in a way, it is a standard, but yeah, it's proprietary because it's owned by Adobe. We're looking forward to potentially HTML5 and some of the video standards that are coming out, and how that they're incorporated into some of the newer web browsers. I think, before YouTube came around, video was a piece of the internet, wasn't a large piece of the internet. I think just like text and image, video is a very important piece of the fabric of the web. I think it definitely needs to be a standard of how you deliver that and how people consume that. But again, before we came around, when we served about 1 million videos a day, we thought we were, that was kind of a big deal. That who else could be serving this much video? And we're trying to plot our growth that at 30 million views a day, we would how could we get any larger than that? And as it stands today, we're serving well over 1.5 billion videos every single day, and it only continues to grow. And I think the rest of the web is operating in the same way. I think again, we're lucky to be in the right place at the right time, build a community around video, but ultimately video is a commodity. Anyone's going to be able to build a video site, video technology, serve their own videos. Over time, YouTube can adapt, become more of a search product to index video that exists on the web. And it'll be easier for us and our users if those videos are seamless. And again, kind of going back to why we started the site in the beginning, is make a seamless video experience. And if that does exist on the web, then it makes sense for us to look for video wherever it exists.
Can I I just wanted to make a comment on what I've been hearing so far because I'm just intrigued, which is that 15 years ago when we had these kinds of discussions, we were hearing very clear statements of things that the network didn't do, things that the network was impeding. And instead, what I'm hearing from you guys is that you're feeling much more constrained by reaching your customers or your potential users than by the net itself. That is, your real constraint is how do I innovate to meet the needs of a consumer of my product? And the net is the net's an enabler. It's there, but it's not the impediment. It's not the thing you have to fight your way around to make it work. You're dealing with a whole higher level set of or different set of issues that are much more outward facing rather than inward facing and fighting with the technology. I did hear about Flash, the fact that you had a standard to enable you to reach out to people, but it's a higher level standard. It's not, gee, how do I get them the bits? How do I get the storage? How do I get the computation? Those problems are all sort of, yeah, they're there. They're all important back-end problems, but they're not your front-end problems. Is that a fair characterization of what I'm hearing? Because I'm intrigued.
So I'm gonna ask Chad a question. So it's my executive privilege. Yeah. So I'm gonna consider YouTube as a failure rather than a success in terms of this question. Okay, so brilliant is wonderful, as successful it is. If you had enough bandwidth to send HD to everybody's house, would you have already displaced television networks around the world?
If we would have a potential if we are connected to that experience of how people consume HD premium long form content, which is on your TV. I think there needs to be better incorporation to the TV itself, any devices that are hooked to it. It's not very seamless. I know we're working on some of those problems to make it easier for people to consume web videos on their on TV, but simply just providing enough bandwidth that people are able to consume this video on their laptops, I don't think is enough. And there are some people out there starting to make some progress in this world. Apple TV, Netflix, the Roku box, and DirecTV. They're starting to incorporate these things, but it's still not easy, again, for the end user. So, I don't know, maybe some standards of how you get that video to the TV and how there's – because in essence, I feel like as video becomes a commodity and video is everywhere, there'll be some higher level kind of media RSS rules or something that operates almost like what they envision IPTV to be, that all the networks, all the studios are going to have a library of content that have some set of rules around it, usage rules. Either you pay a certain rate, like a CPM, or rules on how you're pooling ads to support that content. And I think at the end of the day, again, it comes down to a user problem. We'd love to have infinite bandwidth and the ability to serve HD, but users need to be able to access it in that experience where they want to consume it.
So that's a great answer. I guess what I was, and I agree with that. What I was thinking was, in computing, just in pure computing, no network, monastic mode of you at your computer typing in that mode, about a 10x performance increase is probably in and of itself an enabling technology. If you can store 10 times the data, you have 10 times the CPU, 10 times the something RAM, then the scale of problem you try to solve really is a defining difference from the one you solved before. Unfortunately for video, the irritation of it, the complexity of it grows with the square of the size, because it's if double the resolution, horizontal and vertically, you get 4 times here. So as the bandwidth becomes maybe between 10x and 100x, something like that, for his users, the imagination would fill that immediately. But while it's not like that, then it's the world's most popular place for looking at short form QVG, tiny, poorly encoded videos. So it's brilliantly successful at something nobody wanted to do before, and they want the zeal for watching video is great. So great that if it's lossy encoding and it's very small, that's okay. But that doesn't mean people want that. It's just they don't have a choice of that. If there was a Korean YouTube with 720p and everybody was using that, and we had servers there, and it was because they all had this great network, I think you would find not that people would all move to Korea, but I think you would find you would discover what it was like. It's just that people can't miss it because they don't have it and they don't imagine it. What YouTube is amazing and beyond general people's imagination. So they don't say, I look forward to tomorrow when this is HD. That's just not anybody's imagination. That doesn't mean that's not what the future portends. And yet he can't get there by himself because you have crappy slow networks and slow routers and everything else, right? So I think it's important to understand that it's not, you can't ask the fish about the water because they live in that field. They can't really perceive it. Nothing personal. I think he needs more bandwidth than he says he wants.
Yeah. We always want more.
So let's switch the mic, and we'll leave the projector on. And if you guys want to step to the side, it'll be better for your eyes. You want to come over here?
Should I just go through the top?
Yeah, why not? And you can use this to advance the slides if you like.
Hi, speech and the web. So speech technology, it's not really an application. So my colleagues here have all built really revolutionary applications that have changed a lot of user behavior. But my view of the role of speech technology is really as sort of an enabler or a complement to just about any application that might live on the web. And rather than, although we put out applications to start out with like Google 411, which lets you do roughly local search over your telephone, that's not really the long-term vision. So why is speech important on the web at all? Well, an awful lot of human communication is spoken. Much of the world's information is spoken, and more concretely, there are recent developments that are driving the needs for speech technology on the web. Obviously, mobile is becoming more and more important, so there are 1 or 2 billion people walking around with these little devices that have microphones, that have tiny keyboards that can be hard to type on, that people want to use in all kinds of different usage scenarios, even when they're driving, even when they're walking down the street, when it can be particularly hard to type on those keyboards. So spoken input and output are very useful ways for access. Also, partly thanks to things like YouTube, there's an increasing amount of audio online, and it would be nice to make that searchable and discoverable, not just by whatever metadata happens to be there as part of these. Okay, how's this? Great.
You don't like heavy breathing?
You have a role in this speech group. It's our technology works better without the breath noise too. With increasing amounts of audio online, it would be nice to make that easily discoverable, searchable, navigable by being able to recognize what people are saying and discover things of interest. Also, there are various emerging user populations in other parts of the world that have, more and more of them have mobile phones now, in many cases low-end phones. So for example, in India, there's something like 350 million mobile phones, only 10 or 20 million of them have data plans. And so how can we enable these people to get access to the internet? Speech technology is one of the enablers. And in some parts of the world, there are large illiterate populations that now are starting to have mobile phones. And so if they can't read, then speech technology will be a pretty key piece of giving them access. So the long-term vision is really transparent access. And I mean a couple of different things by that. First of all, in terms of interaction modality, ultimately the goal is the user should be able to decide whatever, depending on their usage scenario, depending on their personal preference, they should have ubiquitous, seamless access to speech. If they want to be talking, they should be able to talk. If they want to be typing, they should be able to type. And it should just be available in every application where it makes sense. And then content type, things like online audio should be easily discoverable. So this is part of kind of a bigger vision where speech technology is just one small piece of it. I stole this slide from Alfred Spector. He used this in his recent keynote at the World Wide Web Conference in Madrid. And the point he was making is that the direction we're going in is totally transparent processing. So for example, if no matter what language you speak, if you're seeking some information and there's something useful in some other language, it should be easily available to you through things like machine translation. You should be able to discover things of interest, whether it's in audio, in images, or whatever. And in fact, there are a number of different efforts in Google research, in image understanding, in machine translation, in speech recognition, and so on, to enable this long-term vision. So speech is just one part of that. So where are we today with speech technology? About 6 months ago, we released Google Voice Search. So this is now available on BlackBerries, iPhones, and excuse me, Android. And so this is basically wide open Google search by voice. Anything you would type to the search engine, you could now say and get back a result. Another recent deployment is voicemail transcription. So this is part of Google Voice, which is the Google capability that basically unifies all of your different telephony interfaces into one new telephone number. And the idea is if you get a voicemail, we transcribe it, and now you can listen to it, you can read it, you can search based on the text in it, depending on what's most useful to you at the time. There have been a couple of other voicemail transcription companies that have come along, but I believe that this is the first one that's totally automated. So the others have human intervention at least some of the time, and for the sake of privacy, having complete automation of voicemail transcription we think brings an important value. So coming to the challenges, and this addresses the question that Michael was raising before, the biggest challenge in achieving the kind of vision I was talking about of ubiquitous, seamless access really has more to do with the core technology and core technology performance than anything else. It's not so much constrained by the internet, but rather by speech recognition accuracy more than any one thing. So to do things like voice search, to do things like ubiquitous access to any application, we have really huge vocabularies to recognize, very, very highly variable language, unpredictable language, lots of speaker variation, different accents, different conditions that cause people to speak differently, speak at different rates, and so on. And also, especially in mobile, where phones get used in all kinds of different environments, lots of problems with background noise that makes speech recognition very difficult. And what we're finding, what's making this problem much more approachable now than just a couple of years ago, is sort of being able to do things at internet scale. So with obviously much greater compute power, richer models. One example is voice search. Just a year ago, I would have said, yeah, that's in our plan, but it's way off. And now it's been out there for 6 months, and I would have been surprised a year ago if you told me how well it would be working today. And some of the leverage that we've been able to bring to make voice search work has been just the vast amount of data available. So although when we deployed voice search, we didn't have speech data, but we had enormous query logs, obviously billions upon billions of textual queries that we could train models of language on. And based on that, we were able to get out of the box to start out with good performance on voice search. Since then, obviously, we've been collecting the speech data and been able to improve a lot more since then. But just the scale of the data available to us, which was, a number of years ago, totally out of the question, just made an enormous difference in terms of what we could accomplish. In the long term, we still are barely scratching the surface. My colleagues talk about having a billion, users of their technology every month. We're just first getting our stuff out there onto the internet. So we don't have a billion users a month talking to our systems at this point. But we have one thing that we've learned even since deploying voice search is that better performance gets us a lot more usage. So, for example, as voice search got out there, as we learned from data, we released new models that give us measurably better recognition accuracy, and all of our metrics that measure usage, things like how many users that try our system once start using it regularly, stuff like that. To the day, we deploy new acoustic models, recognition performance improves, and we see a direct correlation in our metrics that measure how many people become regular users, or how many people actually click, or how many people no longer have to retry after trying a query. So there's very, very direct correlation between growing usage and increasing data. One of the important aspects to taking advantage of that is what I call unsupervised training. And, traditionally, the way you train a speech recognition system is it's this enormous statistical model of language, of pronunciation, of acoustics, and you get people to transcribe. You get, a million utterances, and people sit and transcribe exactly what was said. We feed that to our algorithms, and it learns things about pronunciation. But with that approach, you can't take advantage of the scale of the internet. You can't take advantage of millions upon millions upon millions of users every day. So one of the important research thrusts is unsupervised learning. How can we take all of that data and improve performance without even having a human in the loop? And this plot here shows you some early results. This was from a Goog 411 system that basically shows that with two to four times the amount of data unsupervised, not transcribed, we could match the performance of having human transcribers. So that's actually a pretty exciting result, and points the way towards a means to really take advantage of internet scale as we grow this. So in conclusion, speech is just one of a number of technologies that we're working on at Google that we need to, in order to have really transparent access to all kinds of information, irrespective of language, irrespective of modality and everything else. Lots of research challenges in getting there, but the internet gives us a lot of sources of leverage. The scale of the internet and the data-driven nature of the kinds of approaches we're taking to these problems really benefit from working at internet scale.
Thank you. This is the second time, I guess, in recent times that I saw something on TV about gathering lots and lots and lots of data to get human speech. I haven't worked in the field for a long time, but quite a long time, decades ago, I oversaw DARPA's research on speech understanding, where the emphasis was on trying to actually understand and get an explanatory model for what was going on, and so on and so forth. And so I'm a little nonplussed to see sort of don't bother to try to understand the actual signal and so forth, just get lots and lots and lots and lots of examples. And I can see that it works, but it leaves me with a kind of queasy feeling as to, is that all there is, or at some point are you going to be able to go beyond that?
So first of all, one of the reasons that we need ever-increasing amounts of data is that we're building much bigger and richer models that ultimately capture more and more of the knowledge and structure in the signal. So if we had the same models that were the same size of the models as 10 years ago, the extra data wouldn't buy us much. We'd have enough, data to train what we had. So it's not the case that we're not making the models more sophisticated. We are. That's why we need more and more data. But also an interesting lesson for me in recent years has been that, the search engine, in a certain sense, is a great natural language understanding engine. Back in my formal life, building things that worked in call centers, wanting to move from simple menu systems to more sophisticated things where we would understand what a caller wants and route them to the right place in the company, we had to spend a lot of time on the natural language understanding. How do we find a statistical way to analyze the language and figure out what are the important things that indicate which of the 100 different kinds of services the company offers do they really want? This time, if we could just, for voice search, if we could just get the word string right, somebody may be asking a pretty sophisticated question. The search engine is doing a lot of that work for us. The search engine, we recognize a few words that kind of indicate what somebody wants, and now the search engine is doing some really sophisticated stuff because of all of the data it can so effectively search through and give them stuff that's semantically relevant, semantically useful for what they're trying to accomplish. So it's, in a sense, the search engine is doing a lot of the semantic processing for us.
Okay. Good question? Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is there any consortium that works together on all of these initiatives and the research and implementation and stuff? Because I can't help think of, different universities in Europe that I know that are doing similar kind of work, or even something as simple maybe as Rosetta Stone, where you have all the languages and there's voice recognition when you speak into the system.
Right.
And that's unsupervised, obviously. So I'm just wondering if there's a consortium or same technology or something.
So there are a number of consortia that have come about. The Linguistic Data Consortium has done a lot of data collections in different languages and made it widely available to companies and academic institutions doing this kind of research. The consortia have had more to do with helping with gathering data almost than anything else. But to get to the next level of scale, my view is we really need to be learning from the actual in situ data. Get real usage, get real data flowing in, and in an unsupervised way, keep learning from it. So I'm not sure, looking to the future, that having these big consortia that go out and do explicit data collections is the most important way to advance.
So there's nothing like the IETF for DNS technical standards for voice or speech?
No.
So a couple of things immediately occur to me, and it's partly linked to YouTube. One of them has to do with accessibility in general, and you touched on a number of rationales for wanting speech understanding. This is also a very useful capability if you can't hear, but you could transcribe. That would be a big help. What I don't know, and the same thing would be true for YouTube videos with audio, voice, specifically voice audio, whether we are at the point where the technology would support real-time transcripts or real-time captioning, as opposed to what we do today, which is somebody manually produces the text. I don't want you to give away any secrets at Google, because warning, we have folks who are not from Google. But is technology at the point where real-time transcription and potentially real-time translation would make any sense?
So I would say we're not quite there yet. But, it also depends a lot on the source. Even if you look at YouTube, there's some material, there's Expert Village, there's stuff that we can transcribe pretty reasonably. There's an awful lot of stuff where it's multiple speakers, there's background music, there's all kinds of stuff that makes it next to impossible with today's technology, even though human listening has no trouble at all. So it depends a lot on the source material, but even so, there's also a difference between the purpose of transcription. So even for things like, Expert Village or stuff like that, although we can probably today do a good enough job of transcribing so we can make it searchable, navigable. Important words typically happen multiple times. It's okay if we get it wrong here and there. It's okay if you get a certain percentage of the words wrong. You can still make it searchable in a useful way. But that doesn't mean you produce a readable transcript.
So, I have a quick one. So I'm particularly interested in the technical challenge you referenced with variability in accents. Is this something that users can set, or how are you dealing with that?
So,
as you can imagine, living in the US,
right,
and speaking into these systems, they don't recognize me.
Sorry. So, in general, the approaches we're taking are building bigger models. There are a lot of different possible approaches to it, but building bigger models that capture more of the variation. Most likely asking users to explicitly say, I'm from Brooklyn, so delete all the R's in my pronunciation or something. I can say that because I'm from Brooklyn. So, it is likely to be unreliable. And if somebody's picking up a phone just to do a voice search, do they really, you can't put those kinds of requirements on users. It's too much of a barrier. On the other hand, you could imagine over time, as you have the same people using the same mobile phone and stuff like that, there are things you can learn about individuals that could be helpful.
Along those lines, I'm also a General Magic refugee. And one of the last things Jim White sort of did, who a lot of the older guys here remember,
Yep.
Went to Nuance to basically develop Voice XML on the Voice XML forum. So sort of to get into the sort of standards area, as well as Nuance had the best engine in the Valley at the time.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious what the update is on Voice XML as well as Nuance.
So I was one of the original founders of Nuance, and I agree we had the best engine in the Valley at one time. One of the reasons I came to Google after 10 years at Nuance was data, massive amounts of data, being able to do things at internet scale. So, in my opinion, we're positioned to do better than what Nuance is able to do right now. Nuance has a business model where they don't build the final applications, they sell to enterprises. A big source of friction, this vision of wanting lots and lots of data and always updating your engine is a vision I've held for a long time. At Nuance, there was always friction. These enterprises don't want a science experiment. They want to be told, this will work, and next month I want to deploy, and then go away. And so Google owning these services, we can be continually collecting data, continually optimizing performance in a way that you just can't do at Nuance.
We'll stop questions on that topic right now. We'll get back in just a moment as we reconvene. Okay? Sure. Thank you, sir. Well done. Okay, so I promise to be extremely quick since we don't have any spare time here. I'm just going to show just two pictures real quick. Just hang on just a second. Okay. No, don't worry. It won't hurt. Yeah, it's okay. So just give you a quick sense of this. So my thing is about context, information in context. Google's mission is to organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. I focus on the useful part. You don't want all the hospitals. You want the one close to you when you've been stabbed, right? So you don't want all the hospitals. You want well, where am I? Where's the hospital I want to go? So this is something we have, for just as an example, we have all of the Hubble Space Telescope pictures, all of these sky surveys in context of a large-scale sky survey. So you can zoom in the middle of the Milky Way, of the Big Dipper, and keep going and going and going. Then you see the spiral galaxy. You think, oh, it's right there. I didn't realize that. It's not just a bunch of snapshots, which it is, but you actually know where they're from, which gives really important information. Some of these pictures are pretty huge. Oceans of the world, one of the biggest in the world, especially the rest all the bathymetric data of the whole planet. Watching the sun, babe. Okay, so now scientists of the world are sharing all of their science research covered with all from underwater. So they have places where you click, you get the live buoy launch. They're building networks, IP-based networks, underwater, trying to cover the instrument, the whole ocean, with live data networks. There are HD imagery coming out from off the shore of Oregon, and lower res imagery and numerical data over IP-based networks that are in the ocean. We're trying to do a live feed for that from now on the world. And then this other one here this is Mars again, but these tracks, this is from a real-time thing that's in Google Earth. It's a real-time webcam from Mars. So basically, there's a satellite orbiting. It's taking pictures every day. It sends it back to us, and within with us in an hour, we have it live on Google Earth, and you can actually follow the satellite and see what's going on. Now, Mars is one of those places, like, a great place, no atmosphere. So there's not
privacy problem.
Exactly. There's not much going on there. So I mean, it's not like there's some big car accident or some big mosh pit thing. It's just the same thing, But there's confident data, and you can click on those. You can zoom in. That's from like a couple of hours ago. So Vint had his sort of interstellar IP scheme, and they're actually doing that. We actually have a lot of people in governments around the world who have these sensors they send out that really want to get the data back. They want to look at it right now, and they want in sort of a scientific transparency and fundraising. They want to get the data visible to their senator type people. They also want other scientists to be able to click and download that. Some of this data is really, really big, and we're already more than 10 petabytes replicated multiple times through dozens of data centers, which is inconvenient from a disk drive standpoint. And even if you think about being wealthy, it's still like a nightmare to keep that many disk bills going. So it's the data that people want to upload and see in context is hundreds of times greater than what we accept right now. They won't give us 320 by 240 videos, because they can send that thing all the way to Pluto, and they want to see the actual pixels, right? They won't. It's a TIFF file, so to speak. So that's a real problem we have, and we're definitely constrained in Google Earth. And just to give you a sense of that, we have it's a downloadable application, and it's pretty big because it's pretty fancy. We have the equivalent of over 19,000 T1 lines doing downloads 24 hours a day for the last 5 years. Okay, that's just the download. That's not the data and people using it. So it's great to be a web app and already have Flash installed. It's a real nightmare running big apps like this and downloading them to 500 million people. Just from a bandwidth standpoint. So that's my last slide. Let's reconvene. We can have that off again.
Wow.
Okay, so from my point of view, it's not fast enough. Okay, edge caching really helps us a lot. We like it when ISPs do that. We do all our naming of all our IP, all our file fetches. We use HTTP to get our files that are behind Google Earth and Google Maps. If they get cached, that's good. Some things we have very short keep alive because they're query results and changes next minute. Other things we have like a picture of Mars might last for a month or something. So caching is very important to us. If, a world of edge caching is a great world for Google Earth and Google Maps. I don't know how relevant. It's not dynamic the way Facebook is dynamic. It's not dynamic the way YouTube is dynamic. But it's lots of people flying all the time. We have more eyeballs, so to speak, integrated time than any TV show. There's people just looking at the Earth. So
similar HTTP fetch concept for photos. Oh yeah, we do a similar HTTP fetch concept for photos, just because there's, I don't know what the number is, but like, is that the number of photos that we have? I mean, it's just like, it's insane than the amount of content there. And I agree with you. Like, I mean, taking my comments earlier, sort of like for face value, which is I think the consumer incentives are actually the hardest problem of building a really successful big consumer business. Underneath, though, when you are generating reams and just monstrous amounts of data, and I think we're sort of in the petabytes of data, generating gigs of data a day, doing that intelligently and cleanly and elegantly and fast, and then managing that, and then managing just the reads of all that data, and then keeping everything sprightly and fast is a really hard technical challenge. But we have somewhat of a similar concept in what we use to manage our photo implementation. It's called Haystack. We actually just talked about it, I want to say about 4 or 5 days ago. We talked about it publicly. But that's actually a very great thing. And then, we've also been just innovating a lot on sort of Hadoop, which I think has been also fairly helpful for us. And I think will also be a leading implementation for a lot of next-gen companies that come down the pipe.
Well, first, let's go back to the voice piece, the voice recognition piece, and how we've incorporated that into YouTube. Yeah, obviously we have the closed captioning, but that's kind of a manual process, uploading a separate file, and you can also associate translations with that file as well. We did a limited test with some of the political videos because typically it's a speech, it's not a lot of background noise, it's a little bit easier to detect what they're talking about. And that was somewhat successful. I think to implement it broadly is going to be more of a challenge for us, but the reasons we want to do it, yes, make it more accessible for people that potentially can't hear the words, can read the words, and then implement translation on the fly so people can understand kind of on a global basis what people are talking about, whatever piece of content that is. And then ultimately, yes, it helps with discovery. So it's the last reason why we definitely want to implement the video that we're receiving. It's another signal that we can interpret and understand how we can present that information in a relevant way to our users. So right now it's pretty hard. We just rely on metadata that the uploader associates with their video. But any other input that we can receive is greatly appreciated.
Okay, so we're ready for questions? Yeah. We're bracing ourselves for your witty and clever query. I'll give it to you.
Well, first of all, two things. First of all, I ran into exactly the translation problem with a video just last night. Somebody sent me a video about a guy who is Swedish, and he was interviewed. He won an award. He goes off and does these incredible things, treks across the Himalayas and so on. But the interview was all in Swedish, and I really wanted to know what he was talking about. Ultimately, I wound up turning to a native Swedish speaker at Stanford who very kindly did a transcript for me. So I hope that our future someone will develop a better tool. I wanted to ask a different question, though. One of the things that we talked a lot about during the course of the day has to do with making things interoperate at various layers in the architecture. And as we work our way up into the application space, getting applications to interact with each other is a non-trivial enterprise. And so just to pick the social networking space, for example, causing the various social networking environments to be interworkable in some fashion is still, I think, elusive. And it's the same problem that showed up with instant messaging. Now, there may be business model reasons for reluctance to allow this kind of interworking. But I'm just wondering about the potential for allowing these various applications to exchange information and to be to allow users who are party to these various applications to cause them to interwork in some way. Is that a space where standards making would be useful, or is it the case that most of the participants in these various applications have reasons not to want that interoperation to happen?
So let me just start by talking about the IM space. Before Facebook and after Winamp, I built AIM in ICQ. And I'll tell you there, the interoperability thing was purely a business decision. And we just chose not to do it. At the time, we were the leader, and that's what made sense. Ultimately, in hindsight, that was the wrong decision. And we should have opened up a lot quicker and interoperated faster, and we should have realized the value was actually in the namespace in the network, not in the UI. In any event, moving to today. I think the standards may be fairly helpful, but I actually think it's a technical problem that needs to be solved, which will allow people to have the portability of the information to actually allow the interoperability that you're looking for. And I think what most people would want to see. So specifically, I think like if you break the problem down, the real problem, at least as far as I see it, isn't necessarily sort of like bidirectional transfer of information between two sites where there's a trusted connection and you know what the privacy model is. So for example, if, I'll just use Facebook Connect, but it's equally applicable for Google Friend Connect. I'm on Netflix. I rate a movie, there's a secure connection. It's clear that I'm the person logged in at Facebook, I'm the person logged in at Netflix. The account is bounded. It's fairly straightforward, and you can transfer information back and forth in a secure manner. User experience is straightforward. Value is clear. It becomes much murkier when you start to introduce third parties and fourth parties into that transaction, and you're trying to figure out what part of the data should be shared, to whom, who is it visible to. And there, some model of understanding how privacy works that is still lightweight, I think is probably the single biggest impediment that people need to figure out. I'm honestly somewhat skeptical that a standards body type approach is actually the best way to make that problem more tractable. I really think you're better off with a couple of companies going and doing some lighthouse implementations of it that prove how it can be done in an iframe or via some simple thing that's secure, that's lightweight, and that has a really slick user experience, and then working backwards to figure out how to make that generalized for everybody. But I would like to see the exact same thing you talked about. I really do though think that that's just really just a matter of figuring out a elegant technical implementation that's workable, and I think that's probably faster done by a handful of companies just going and doing specific implementations and figuring out how to generalize it.
to say. There's probably still some business reasons though. It's not implemented. It's not on the Facebook side. Is that right?
No, I actually don't think that's the case. Like I think, like I said, platform was sort of like an appetizer for Facebook Connect. I think in general, the ability to have all of this social componentry as a layer that exists across the entire internet, I think is incredibly valuable. And there are multiple parties, not just us, including you guys, that are trying to build that. And I think those interconnects are awesome. So we will want to move there as quickly as possible. And really, I think the more nuanced and elegant and sort of more complex use cases just need to get hashed out as people get more and more comfortable. This is why I talked about, this is really about moving consumer behavior to a place where they see the value. Oh, cool. This is cool. Like, I mean, we start with something like, Netflix, where I rate a movie and now I can see it in my feed and people rate, and I think that's cool. That's great. I think then the bar goes next to, what happens in a more sort of secure type transaction type environment and iterating on a use case there, or something that, elegantly integrates an application that sits on the desktop with the web that has the same componentry, or that takes a more complex use case that uses content that's richer, like video and audio. But all of those things happen, and you just need a starting point, And I think if you think about the fact it's only been 4 or 5 months, I mean, it's fairly good progress, Yeah.
Sorry to give you a hard time, but thanks a lot. Yeah, you're welcome. It's sort of like a video presentation intro. It's a hard way. No, I again, just coming from the user's perspective and kind of what we're concentrating on YouTube, we're definitely have our hands around the video piece. I think the social component, more generally Google and the social component, it's been a work in progress. I think with Friend Connect or Facebook Connect, the opportunity for our users to understand how they're sharing information and to whom, and to do that in a very seamless way is definitely something the entire industry needs to work on. And if that's a lightweight collaboration to accomplish that, consider an open invitation for you to work with us at YouTube and maybe Facebook Connect to accomplish that with our users. All right, there you go.
I wanted to ask how much is the tension between security and performance, both at Facebook and YouTube, because more security may mean more latency or less ease of use.
It's such a great question. There is a clear trade-off. The more sort of like overhead you add, that there's just more checks that you're doing. There's all of these other things that just create overhead, and so it's not really a tension. I think the thing is, it's like trying to figure out more elegant ways of pushing as much data all over the place as possible so that it can exist closer to end users, that you can do the necessary privacy checks to ensure that the privacy model comes first and foremost, but then you can still deliver something that's lightweight, is probably like the thing that we spend a lot of time trying to figure out more and more elegant solutions to. And it is a really tough problem. The amount of dynamic content. So I mean, like, you can probably just profile this yourself. Like when your cache is cold and you load, home.php of Facebook, you can see how much data has to come down the pipe. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And that's hard to make that light and quick and usable, but at the same time, completely still make sure that you see what you're supposed to see. Also, when you publish stuff, it only goes to those people you want to publish it to. And so that's probably like the problem that we spend a lot of time trying to make better and better. And it's a really cool problem, but it's a tension and it's a trade-off, and you try to basically figure out more and more ways of just having as much distributed information as possible that still doesn't cause us to completely slow the site down.
So I have a question I think a general question for this panel, or perhaps for the security search speakers earlier today, or maybe general in the room, I don't know. And I guess it's a day where we have to pick on Facebook a little bit because it's going to be based on a Facebook example. I just don't understand, how do you figure out what's bad content and what is so bad content that you have to shut down something? Or how do you define malware or bad content, or how do you define stuff like that in a scalable technical solution that at the same time takes legal considerations into consideration. And the example I had was I was reading the Danish newspaper, and it says Facebook is closing down a Ronaldo site that has 3 million fans and 500,000 hits a month. And, obviously the press
what's the
is
example?
like...
What's the site?
The Ronaldo site. It's a soccer player. So anyways, just an example. Like, how do you figure out... How do you decide to shut down something like that? When what criteria makes it? I mean, I'm not specifically Facebook. I'm more in general. Like, how do you figure stuff like that out?
We have those issues as well. Yeah, sure.
I'm going to pass the buck here.
Thinking on him for a little while. I'll take the mic. No, Free dinner better be worth it. So first of all, you obviously start out with your terms of use and your usage guidelines, as a baseline of terms of what you're trying to communicate to your community, of how to interact appropriately, how to what videos to upload, how you should comment, all these different things of the user input side, and then you try to automate some of that. Or for text comments in general, we try to detect certain keywords that people should be using. There's different ways to kind of weight how relevant that the comments are, and options now for users to turn off potentially bad comments. They try to hide that. And you have some element of users voting on those comments as well. But then looking at the video side, just as we're trying to become more intelligent in how we're identifying what's in the video and presenting that in a relevant way to our users, the same way for bad content. So basically, we have to be notified. So if it was a copyright violation or something pornographic or violent on the site, for some of the obvious cases, people can visually detect if the video shouldn't be on the site based on our policies and usage guidelines, and they notify us, and we have a team that reviews and takes down that content 24 hours a day. For the rights piece, people can't visually determine rights. You can't see rights. You need the owner to tell you who owns those rights. So we have automated the DMCA procedure, and it has become more sophisticated over time, where it's also included audio and video fingerprinting, just to make it more automated and scalable. If they provide reference material, we can automatically detect and place rules against that content, however they determine to place those rules. But at the end of the day, it's not perfect. You're kind of relying on some technology to some extent, users, and then people using the tools correctly to notify us when something shouldn't be on the site.
Yeah, all joking aside, we have a very similar implementation in the absence of the audio and fingerprinting part that Chad spoke about. So we have a team of user sort of operations people. We have the ability for you to report content, and then we also obviously, when you get in local jurisdiction notifying you of copyright violation or otherwise, then we respect those. So if you get a DMCA takedown notice as an example, then you live by those. It's a fair amount. That's a technical, precise answer. Fair amount. Oh, how many resources of the company? And I said it's a fair number. There you go.
So I have a slight.
150. It was the publicly disclosed number.
Malware consideration is a little bit different than a child porn site or something, right? It doesn't require a human being. In fact, it can't require a human being because it comes and goes so fast. It has to be algorithmic. We recognize that when we're in a position of putting out, in effect, denouncing a website as being bad, hopefully not all websites, but when that happens, we're sending a feed out to Firefox and Chrome and Safari and all the search results. I mean, that's a pretty decisive effect, right? So we don't take that lightly. We have defined what we consider pretty clear-cut criteria. So when you just go to that site without even clicking on things, it's installing software on your machine, we figure, okay, it's clear-cut, it's malware. But even then, it feels like there's too much power in the hands of Google if we're just going to make up those criteria and impose it on the world like that. So there's a Stop Badware organization that at Harvard and with other organizations as part that help define what those criteria should be.
Just curious, the context of your answer is great. I'm just
Yeah.
curious who you are.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'd introduced myself earlier. I'm Eric Gross. I head the security team at Google.
Is there time for another question before Tony gets his in?
I got something.
Enough today.
So this is going to be the last question.
My last question. It's your last question.
Yeah, we started a little bit late. We're ending about an hour and 5 minutes.
It's going to be till another 10 minutes.
Okay, so we get 2 questions. So you have a question?
Yeah.
He has a question. So why don't you ask your question first?
Thank you. So I just want to ask you this as sort of application developers and people who deal with issues of location and also issues of privacy. It's something we're grappling a lot with. We do things with location traces, and we use location traces over time, and we want to use them for health-related purposes and other things. And you want to compare your location traces that are then activity traces, right? Now and later, we've talked about they would become a nice little add-on to throw onto your Facebook page to describe, what kind of a person are you. Characteristics of how you spend your time, right? So, but we also, obviously the privacy concerns are very high. And so the notion that this is just raw data that goes onto your Facebook page that's shared, or raw data that can even necessarily goes straight to Google Latitude. Right now it has no memory, but in the future, interesting apps, useful things, it might have memory. So I'm just wondering if you guys have grappled with this question of the combination of your location-oriented and sharing-oriented architectures. What you're debating internally, if you can share that in terms of these questions about location as a piece of information and how that relates and how you think about it privacy-wise, not just for me as an individual, but also in terms of its availability for mining and advertisement and such.
I'll just go a little bit further than what you said to start by saying I think the next really amazing internet experience actually has location as its core element. And it's probably purely mobile-centric with some neat web add-ons versus sort of unfortunate context today, which is limited availability of GPS information or otherwise and location data streaming back. That being said, I think this is a two-part problem. The first part is how do you make sure that users are in control and you're given enough powerful controls via very limited UI on the phone to be able to know what's happening and what you want to do, whether it's both passively passing information up because that's what you choose to do, or whether it's because you want to actively publish things like location along with other information. But in both of those things, the fine-grained controls are critical, and how you implement that in the UI is a fairly difficult problem because the UI is inconsistent across all manner of devices. But doing that in a simplified way that can actually confidently exist in the same manner and same behavior as you switch devices from one to the other is something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. That's piece number one. The second piece, though, is that you still need to provide a compelling reason why people then go through that context and set defaults, change defaults, understand what's happening, etc. And I think today, I don't think I've actually seen a really great location-enabled service, and I think that is where a company like us, working by ourselves but also working with others, can probably create something very slick that weaves location as a critical part of a very social experience. So change the consumer behavior and give them incentives to want to share that information, but then also make sure that you can have a confident implementation that exists across all manner of UI that gives people confidence that they're sharing when they want to, and then giving them the defaults to basically change the velocity at which they share that information. So there's no real raging debate. It's really about how do you solve those problems, and it's actually more a lot of just a lot of hard work. Like, what does a product experience look like? What does the implementation look like? And then trying to find a good medium between the two of them and kind of move that forward.
I mean, quickly, just on the location piece, I mean, for us, it's just another piece of data that helps us present the video. But I think more specifically, you're kind of talking about how people are managing a piece of private data that they don't necessarily want to share broadly. We kind of deal with that on the video viewing experience. We try to track what people are viewing at a limited scale and try to present them relevant videos, more of a personalized experience of, you like this, you also may like that. But I think, again, key just comes down to how you present that, how they can manage their own data. Just giving them control of their destiny is how we deal with it.
I want to add something. So this is Google talking to Google, so maybe it's cheating, but So I look at this stuff two ways, and I want to share this real important. So one is like a wristwatch. Okay, the wristwatch isn't the killer application for time. You know, I mean, time is an intrinsic attribute of everything. Everything's a noun, has time with it some way. So people maybe use a wristwatch or a clock on the wall. That's part of the way of experiencing time or just discussing the time attribute of things. But time isn't about wristwatches or any kind of clock, right? Time is broader than that. So location is everything's got a noun. Everything's a noun. It's got a location. At a certain point in time, it's at a location, the geospatial location. So that's an attribute of every single thing. It's every grain of sand. It's every single thing. So as it happens, so the pervasiveness of location is much broader than the pervasiveness of a particular language, a particular IPv6, or there will be IPv7, but there's always been time, there always will be time. Some things are really, really pervasive, and time is location and time one of those things. Those are both amazingly enabled in a new and powerful way by GPS satellites. Not only do they give people locations, which we'll talk about, they also give 50 microsecond accuracy time all around the world, which never existed before. Nobody knew what time it was over there until GPS went up. So that's the second key attribute of GPS. So that's the technical thing. It's really important to shape half of the experience going forward in all internet things. The other part is, for me personally, when there's newspaper articles about government of X hates Google for something about Earth or maps, right? I'm the guy on the plane flying to X to meet the president of India. Okay, so that's what the advocate part means, right? It's like the chief arrow taker. And there's something really important about all these things. The things that Facebook does, things that Amazon does, things that Google does, things that eBay does. These are things that society didn't anticipate. There's a cycle time to the legal process, which codifies human experience and judgment. We're innovating faster than that cycle time. So we're ahead of the decision about what's right and wrong. So Chad puts up all these videos. He didn't know that it's going to be something that would attract the interest of Viacom, for example. He didn't know that. It wasn't like, or China or anybody, So China shuts down YouTube and says, we're not afraid of the internet. Well, obviously they're scared as hell of the internet, and they shut it down. So we didn't understand that. No, but I didn't know that I would get like hate mail from like the president of Iran in the middle of a war about how he hates the word Persian Gulf instead of Arabian Gulf kind of thing. It's like unbelievable. They have time to talk to me about that, right? It's really, it's unbelievable. So these applications, I've talked to